On Valentine's Day, 1999, while Hong Kong celebrated romance, police in the Tuen Mun district cracked open a rusted iron trunk to reveal a nightmare. Inside, packed in layers of salt to mask the stench of decay, was a human head and severed limbs. The architect of this brutality was not a hardened Triad enforcer, but a teenage girl with the face of an angel. Before we unlock the disturbing psychology behind the salted corpse case, please support the channel by hitting that subscribe button. The morning of February 14th, 1999, began like any other humid, overcast winter day in Hong Kong's Tuen Mun district. The streets were beginning to fill with vendors selling flowers and chocolates, capitalizing on the Valentine's Day rush. But for a young man named Liu Zhaicheng, there was no celebration. Panic was setting in. Liu rushed into the local police station, his breath short and his demeanor erratic. He told the desk sergeant that his friend had vanished without a trace and that something felt terribly wrong at their apartment. Missing person reports are common in a dense metropolis like Hong Kong, often dismissed as domestic disputes or debts. But the sheer terror in Liu's voice compelled the authorities to act immediately. A tactical unit was dispatched to the Tai Hing estate, a massive public housing complex characterized by its high-density concrete towers. They headed for Unit 2936 in the Hing Yi house. As the officer stepped out of the elevator and approached the metal gate of the apartment, the first sign of trouble hit them before they even touched the door handle. It was a smell, a heavy, cloying odor that hung in the stagnant air of the hallway. To the veteran officers, it was unmistakable, the scent of organic rot, trying to be masked but failing. When their calls for entry went unanswered, the police breached the door. The interior of Unit 2936 was a chaotic mess. The small apartment was cluttered with debris, clothes, and trash, indicative of a lifestyle that had spiraled out of control. Bloodstains were visible on the floor and splattered across the walls, dried into dark, rusty flakes. As the investigators moved through the cramped living space, the source of the foul odor became localized. It was emanating from a large iron trunk sitting in the room. The trunk looked out of place, ominous in its stillness. To confirm the source of the smell, the detectives pried the lid open. The sight that greeted them sent a shock wave through even the most hardened members of the force. Inside the trunk, resting on a bed of clothes and debris, were human body parts in advanced stages of decomposition. A human head, wrapped tightly in white cloth, sat atop the grisly pile. The entire contents had been heavily dusted with a thick layer of coarse salt, a crude attempt to desiccate the flesh and suppress the smell of death. Forensic teams arrived shortly after, turning the apartment into a sterile zone. As they carefully removed the contents of the trunk, they realized the grim puzzle was incomplete. The victim's hands and left foot were missing. A quick search of the building's perimeter led officers to a dumpster near the housing block, where they recovered the discarded limbs wrapped in plastic. The victim was identified as the tenant of the apartment, a young man named Zhang Wenwei. The autopsy and forensic analysis painted a brutal picture of Zhang's final moments. The medical examiner estimated that Zhang had been dead for approximately 4 or 5 days before the discovery. His body was a map of violence, bearing over a dozen stab wounds. However, the analysis of the wound channels revealed a peculiar detail. Out of the 13 distinct stab wounds inflicted while he was alive, only one was fatal. The rest were superficial, designed to inflict pain rather than death. There were also blunt force trauma injuries on his head and neck, consistent with being struck by the hard edge of a folding chair. The pathologist noted that these blows, while severe enough to knock someone unconscious, would not have caused brain damage or death. The truly stomach-churning finding came from the examination of the large lacerations across his torso. The medical examiner determined that several of the most gruesome wounds, including a massive gash running from his chest to his abdomen, were inflicted post-mortem. This suggested that the killer had begun the process of dismembering the body to dispose of the evidence, likely planning to flush remains or scatter them, but had stopped or changed tactics, opting instead for the iron trunk and salt method. With the physical evidence secured, the Special Task Force turned their attention to the who and why. The Tai Hing estate in 1999 was known as a rough neighborhood, built by the government in 1977 to house the working class. It had become a melting pot of struggling families and, inevitably, Triad activity. Both the victim, Zhang Wenwei, and the informant, Liu Zhaicheng, were products of this environment. They were described as kids who started out decent but had been neglected by their families, eventually drifting into the gravitational pull of local street gangs. Because the apartment had not been ransacked for valuables, cash and electronics were left untouched. Detectives ruled out a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. The brutality of the killing and the attempt to hide the body suggested either a vendetta or a gangland execution. The police immediately focused on Zhang Wenwei's social circle. In the underworld of Tuen Mun, loyalty is fleeting, and violence is the primary currency for resolving disputes. Detectives rounded up Zhang's known associates, a group of young delinquents and Triad wannabes, to build a timeline of the days leading up to the murder. Interrogations revealed that Zhang was not exactly a model citizen. Tension had been brewing between him and his crew. According to witness statements, in late January of 1999, just weeks before his death, Zhang had pulled off a solo heist. He had robbed a local jewelry store, a high-risk crime that netted him a significant amount of valuable assets. In the criminal code of the streets, working alone is often seen as a betrayal, especially if you don't kick up a percentage of the take to the group. A member of Zhang's gang found out about the jewelry heist and demanded a cut. He threatened Zhang, telling him that if he didn't share the wealth, he would report Zhang's breach of protocol to the senior Triad leadership. This was a serious threat. Triad punishments for eating alone could range from severe beatings to expulsion or worse. Zhang, described as stubborn and arrogant, refused to pay up. This defiance led to a confrontation where his secret operation was exposed to the group. He was subjected to a disciplinary action, a severe beating meant to teach him a lesson. Following this incident, Zhang had tried to leave the gang, but in that world, you don't just hand in a resignation letter. The police theorized that this internal conflict had escalated. Had the gang decided that a beating wasn't enough? Had they come back to finish the job? The focus shifted to the gang's leader, a man named Shu Ritian. Detectives brought him into the interrogation room, pressing him on the jewelry store dispute. Shu was cooperative, surprisingly so. He admitted to the conflict. He admitted that Zhang had broken the rules and had been punished for it. However, he insisted that the issue was considered settled. Shu explained that Zhang had recently shown a change in attitude, becoming more submissive and respectful to the hierarchy. The gang was considering forgiving him completely. Furthermore, Shu pointed out a pragmatic reality of their operation. Their group had a strict rule against killing unless absolutely necessary. Killing brings heat, and heat kills business. Murdering a member over a dispute that was already resolved didn't make sense. Shu then provided a rock-solid alibi for the entire crew. He explained that earlier in February, the gang had attempted another theft in the area that went sideways. They narrowly escaped arrest, but the police presence in Tuen Mun had intensified significantly in response. To avoid the crackdown, the core group of 10 members had decided to lay low. They fled to a hideout in a different district to wait for the heat to die down. The entire group had gone into hiding except for one person, Zhang Wenwei. Zhang had chosen to stay behind in Tuen Mun. He told the group he wanted to stay with his girlfriend. Police investigators spent days verifying Shu's story. They checked surveillance, corroborated movements, and interviewed witnesses in the district where the gang claimed to be hiding. The alibis held up. All 9 of Zhang's associates were accounted for during the window of time the medical examiner established as the time of death. The gangland execution theory was crumbling. The police were back to square one. They had a body in a box, a room full of blood, and a victim with a history of violence. But the most obvious suspects were miles away when the knife went in. Just as the investigation seemed to be stalling, the detectives received a critical piece of intelligence that shifted the spotlight entirely. It wasn't a stranger or a rival gangster who was closest to Zhang in his final days. It was the people living under his own roof. According to new information, in early February of 1999, the apartment at Tai Hing Estate had 3 occupants. The apartment actually belonged to Zhang's parents, but they were largely absent, only returning home once every few months. This left the unit as a free-for-all for Zhang. Living with him were 2 people, his friend, Liu Zicheng, the man who had reported the crime, and Zhang's girlfriend, a young woman named Yi Baowen. This trio, Zhang, Liu, and Yi, had been living in close quarters in the small public housing unit. The dynamic between them became the focal point of the investigation. The police brought Liu Zicheng back in. This time, they weren't looking at him just as a witness, but as someone who knew far more than he had initially revealed in his panicked report. Under intense questioning, the layers of the story began to peel away. Liu revealed that on February 9th, 5 days before the body was found, the atmosphere in the apartment had reached a boiling point. Zhang Wenwei had pulled Liu aside for a private conversation. Zhang was agitated, paranoid, and angry. He told Liu that he suspected his girlfriend, Yi Baowen, was cheating on him. Zhang pressed Liu for the truth. He demanded to know if Liu had seen anything suspicious. Liu, feeling the pressure and perhaps realizing that covering for Yi was no longer an option, cracked. He admitted to Zhang that his suspicions were correct. Liu told him that he had seen Yi Baowen getting intimate with another man outside the apartment on multiple occasions. This confirmation was the match that lit the fuse. Zhang Wenwei, already a man prone to violence and stubbornness, flew into a rage. He declared that he was going to confront Yi immediately and demand an explanation. Liu told the police that he wanted no part of the impending domestic war. He decided to leave the apartment, to give the couple privacy to sort out their issues, or perhaps more accurately, to escape the blast radius of Zhang's temper. He stayed out late, wandering the neon-lit streets of Tuen Mun, delaying his return as long as possible. When Liu finally returned to Unit 2936 late that night, the apartment was locked from the inside. Standing in the hallway, he could hear the muffled sounds of a violent argument erupting behind the metal door. He heard shouting, the crash of objects being thrown, and the distinct, terrifying sounds of a physical struggle. Liu tried to intervene. He pounded on the door, shouting for them to open up. He estimated he knocked at least 7 times. The first response he heard was chilling. It was a raspy, strained voice. He identified it as Zhang's gasping out 2 words, "Don't hit." Then, silence. Liu knocked again, harder this time. The second response came from Yi Baowen. She yelled through the door, her voice sharp and agitated. Immediately after she spoke, loud music began blasting from inside the apartment, drowning out any other sounds. It was a classic tactic to mask noise in the thin-walled housing estates. Liu, confused and increasingly worried, shouted through the door that he and Zhang had plans to go out drinking. It was a lie, a desperate attempt to de-escalate the situation and get Zhang out of the room. Yi screamed back, "Get lost!" Liu stood in the hallway, uncertain of what to do. The music continued to thump through the door. After a while, he tried a different approach. He knocked again and lied, saying his mobile phone battery was dead and he needed his charger. This time, the door cracked open. Yi Baowen stood there. She didn't let him in. She simply handed him a bag containing his charging equipment and immediately tried to close the door. Liu tried to look past her, to see his friend, but she blocked his view. Desperate, Liu began kicking the metal security gate, demanding to see Zhang. Yi remained cold. She told him that it wasn't convenient for Zhang to go out right now. She slammed the door shut and locked it. Inside, the volume of the music was cranked up even higher. Realizing he wasn't getting back in that night, and perhaps too afraid to push further, Liu left. He spent the night on the streets, sending text messages to Zhang's pager, hoping for a reply that never came. Days passed. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Liu Zhicheng decided to try one last time. He returned to the apartment. Yi Baowen opened the door. Again, she blocked his entry. She handed him a suitcase containing his personal belongings and told him to leave immediately. This was the breaking point for Liu. As he stood there, he noticed something subtle but alarming. The lock on the front door had been changed. The combination of the silence from Zhang, the strange behavior of Yi, the loud music, and now the changed locks convinced Liu that something catastrophic had happened. He called Zhang's older brother, and together they agreed that the situation was dire. They went to the police station, leading to the discovery of the iron trunk. The police now had a timeline and a prime suspect, Yi Baowen, the 19-year-old girlfriend. But when they looked for her, she was gone. Yi Baowen, along with the couple's daughter, a child less than 4 years old, had vanished. The police immediately issued an all-points bulletin for Yi Baowen, classifying her as a dangerous suspect involved in a homicide. Her face was plastered across newspapers and television screens throughout Hong Kong. 3 days later, on the evening of February 17th, a man named Liu Junhua walked into a police station. He told officers that the woman on the news, the wanted fugitive Yi Baowen, was his ex-girlfriend. The detectives saw an opportunity. They asked Liu Junhua to help them set a trap. They wanted him to contact Yi, lure her out on the pretense of meeting up so they could arrest her. Liu Junhua tried, but Yi was cautious. She refused to meet. However, Liu Junhua provided the police with a disturbing account of his recent interactions with her. He told them that on the morning of February 10th, the day after the violent argument, Liu Zhicheng had overheard Yi had called him. She had asked him for a favor. She needed help moving some items. And, more specifically, she asked him to buy her a knife. She claimed the chicken cleaver at her apartment had broken. Liu Junhua, unaware of the murder, had agreed. He met with her, bought the knife, and even shared 2 meals with her that day. He recalled that she acted completely normal. There was no shaking, no panic, no sign that she was living with a decomposing corpse in a box. It wasn't until he saw her face on the wanted poster that the pieces clicked into place. The item she was moving, the new knife, he realized with horror that he might have inadvertently aided in the destruction of evidence. Armed with this new lead, the police narrowed their net. On February 26th, 12 days after the body was found, the manhunt came to an end. Police raided a rental apartment on Shanghai Street in the Mong Kok district. Inside, they found Yi Baowen. Her young daughter was with her. Yi was arrested and brought in for interrogation. Initially, she was defiant, spinning lies and dodging questions. But the weight of the evidence, the witness testimony, the forensic traces, the purchase of the knife was overwhelming. Finally, the 19-year-old broke. She looked at the detectives and confessed. She admitted to killing Zhang Wenwei. She admitted to the dismemberment. But as she began to tell her story, the detectives realized this wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the explosive finale to a tragedy that had been building for years. To understand how a 19-year-old girl could live with a decomposing body in a trunk, we must first peel back the layers of Yi Baowen's life. In the interrogation room, stripped of her freedom and facing a potential life sentence, Yi began to narrate a history that was as tragic as it was horrifying. The detectives, who had initially viewed her as a cold-blooded monster, soon found themselves listening to a story of systemic abuse, manipulation, and a descent into moral darkness that began long before the first knife was drawn. Yi Baowen was born in 1980. By all accounts, she had a promising start in life. In the mid-90s, she was a standout student, with excellent grades and a bright future. But it was her appearance that drew the most attention. With delicate features and a natural charisma, she was considered one of the most beautiful girls in her district. Her looks were not just noticed by her peers. She had been scouted and selected as a model for a shampoo brand, her face gracing advertisements that promised purity and elegance. She was the kind of girl who had boys trailing after her, desperate for a moment of her attention. She seemed destined for a life of glamour, or at least comfort. But that trajectory shattered approximately 5 years prior to the murder, when she was just 14 years old. One evening, Yi went to a karaoke bar with some classmates to celebrate a birthday. It was a typical teenage outing, filled with loud music and laughter. There, she crossed paths with Zhang Wenwei. Zhang was older, street-smart, and carried the dangerous allure of someone connected to the Triad underworld. He spotted the young beauty and immediately made his move, using his charm and confidence to isolate her from her friends. Zhang did not just court her, he entrapped her. Shortly after they met, he invited her to his apartment in the Tuen Mun district, under the guise of hanging out. Once she was behind closed doors, the charm evaporated. Zhang sexually assaulted her. For a 14-year-old girl in 1994, the options following such a trauma were paralyzingly slim. Shame, fear of victim blaming, and the terrifying reputation of Zhang's gang connections kept her silent. She did not go to the police. She did not tell her parents. Instead, in a psychological twist often seen in cases of severe abuse and grooming, she stayed. The trauma bond was formed. Zhang became the center of her world, not because she loved him in a healthy sense, but because he had taken something from her that she felt she could never get back. The consequences of their toxic union materialized quickly. Yi discovered she was pregnant. Terrified and naive, she went to a private clinic, hoping to terminate the pregnancy before her parents or school found out. However, the doctor she consulted refused to perform the procedure. He cited her young age and the advanced stage of the pregnancy, warning that an abortion could be life-threatening. He turned her away, leaving her with no medical recourse. Yi Baowen was backed into a corner. She possessed a terrifying resolve for someone so young. She managed to hide her pregnancy from everyone, her teachers, her friends, and even her own parents living in the same house. She wore baggy clothes and withdrew from social activities, carrying the secret burden alone. In May of 1995, the situation reached its inevitable climax. Yi went into labor. Too afraid to go to a hospital where her age would trigger a police report and parental notification, she and Zhang made a decision that foreshadowed the grim reality of their future. They decided she would give birth inside the cramped bathroom of Zhang's public housing apartment. Without painkillers, doctors, or sterile equipment, Yi gave birth to a baby girl. It was a visceral, bloody ordeal that cemented the bond between her and Zhang. They were now partners in a deep, dark secret. They named the child Yi Yong-yu. The birth of the child brought a new set of crises. Zhang Wenwei, who was essentially a low-level gangster with no steady income, saw the baby as a financial anchor he could not afford to drag. He proposed abandoning the infant, suggesting they leave her on a street corner or at a government building. But Yi Baowen, despite her youth and the trauma of the birth, refused. She begged him to let her keep the child. Eventually, Zhang relented, but the dynamic of their household was set. They were children raising a child in poverty. For the next few years, Yi lived a fractured double life. During the day, she played the role of the dutiful daughter and student. She continued to attend school, maintaining the facade of a normal teenager. At night, or whenever she could sneak away, she would go to Zhang's apartment to care for her daughter and play house with her abuser. Zhang stayed home to watch the baby, living off the meager allowance Yi received from her parents and whatever illicit gains he could scrape together from his gang activities. The deception required to maintain this lifestyle was exhausting. Yi eventually told her parents that she was moving in with her older sister to focus on studying for her university entrance exams. In reality, she moved into the chaotic, squalid apartment with Zhang full-time. Despite the immense pressure, Yi's natural intelligence shone through. She actually passed her exams with high marks, securing a spot at a university. It was a ticket out, a chance to escape the cycle of poverty and violence. But the financial reality of supporting a deadbeat boyfriend and a toddler was an insurmountable wall. The tuition and associated costs were too high, and Zhang contributed nothing. Yi was forced to forfeit her spot at the university, extinguishing her last hope for a normal life. From 1996 to 1998, the situation in the apartment spiraled into a nightmare of reproductive neglect and callousness. Yi Baowen became pregnant 2 more times. By now, the novelty of parenthood had worn off, and the crushing weight of poverty had hardened their hearts. They did not keep these children. In a shocking admission, Yi revealed that she gave birth to these subsequent infants and abandoned them. One was left at a subway station, placed on a cold bench for a stranger to find. The other was abandoned at a hospital in Tuen Mun. They treated these new lives not as human beings, but as inconveniences to be discarded. This serial abandonment hinted at a profound erosion of empathy, a psychological numbing essential for what was to come later. As the years ground on, the relationship between Zhang and Yi began to rot. Zhang was volatile and violent. Whenever he faced setbacks in the underworld, a failed robbery, a dispute with his gang, or simply a lack of money, he brought that rage home. He beat Yi frequently. The man who had once been her protector in a twisted sense was now her jailer. Yi's feelings for Zhang turned from a complex trauma bond into profound resentment and indifference. She began to look for an exit, not physically, but emotionally. She sought comfort in the arms of other men, searching for the validation and safety she lacked at home. In April of 1998, while shopping in the bustling district of Causeway Bay with her younger sister, Yi met a firefighter named Shu. He was stable, employed, and represented everything Zhang was not. They began a passionate affair. Yi would tell Zhang she was going shopping, then disappear to meet Shu for dates in Tuen Mun and Yuan Long. For brief windows of time, she could pretend she was just a normal girl dating a normal guy, free from the crying child and the abusive gangster waiting at home. Then, on New Year's Eve of 1998, she met Liu Junhua. Liu was an artist, a painter she encountered while helping her uncle run a candy stall at a holiday market. There was a gentle quality to him that attracted her. They dated for a few months. Although Yi eventually broke off the romantic aspect of their relationship, she kept Liu Junhua close as a friend. He became another emotional life raft for her. However, Yi Baowen was living on borrowed time. She was juggling a possessive, violent, live-in boyfriend, a secret daughter, and multiple affairs, all while residing in a small community where secrets are hard to keep. Liu Junhua, the artist, eventually learned the truth. He discovered that his ex-girlfriend was actually living with a man and raising a child. But Zhang Wenwei, the boyfriend, remained in the dark about the extent of Yi's betrayal. Zhang was introverted and socially awkward, which kept him isolated from the rumor mill for a while. But he was also deeply paranoid. He sensed the distance growing between them. He noticed the new clothes, the unexplained absences, and the way Yi looked at him with cold, dead eyes. The tension in Unit 2936 was palpable. It was a powder keg, waiting for a spark. That spark came on February 9th, 1999. Zhang Wenwei could no longer suppress his suspicions. The humiliation of being a cuckold, combined with his diminishing status in his gang, pushed him to the edge. He confronted their roommate, Liu Zhicheng, demanding the truth. When Liu confirmed that Yi was seeing other men, Zhang didn't just get angry, he snapped. That evening, when Yi returned home, the atmosphere was heavy with impending violence. Zhang did not scream immediately. He waited. When the door was locked and the world outside was shut away, he unleashed his fury. This was not a standard domestic argument. It was a fight for dominance. Zhang attacked her, fueled by the rage of betrayal. But this time, Yi Baowen did not cower. The 19-year-old girl, hardened by 5 years of abuse, 3 births, and the disposal of 2 children, fought back. The apartment became a gladiator pit. They threw everything they could get their hands on: chairs, tools, household objects. The noise was deafening, a cacophony of screaming and crashing metal. This was the noise that the roommate, Lu Zicheng, would hear from the hallway. During the chaotic brawl, the dynamic shifted. Zhang, perhaps weakened by drug use or simply overwhelmed by Yi's ferocious, desperate retaliation, lost the upper hand. He was knocked to the floor. Yi, in a state of adrenaline-fueled frenzy, grabbed a weapon. She didn't stop when he went down. The years of suppressed rage, the memory of the rape, the lost university degree, the poverty, the beatings, it all poured out of her. She struck him repeatedly. She attacked his head. She attacked his torso. When the roommate, Liu Zhicheng, knocked on the door that first time, Zhang was still alive. He was bleeding, broken, and terrified. His raspy plea, "Don't hit," was the last shred of his humanity begging for mercy. But Yi Baowen was past the point of no return. She wasn't just fighting a boyfriend. She was extinguishing the source of her misery. She silenced him. She ignored the knocking at the door. She turned up the music to drown out the dying gasps of the father of her child. Over the next few hours, Zhang Wenwei bled to death on the floor of the living room. The man who had controlled her life for 5 years was now just a pile of cooling flesh. Yi Baowen stood over him, breathless and bloodied. The silence that followed the music was heavy. Most people would have called an ambulance or the police in a panic, but Yi did not panic. Her mind, already accustomed to hiding pregnancies and disposing of unwanted infants, shifted gears into a chillingly pragmatic mode. She had a body to hide. She had a daughter sleeping in the next room, and she had a life she wanted to continue living. She looked at the small apartment. There was no place to hide a full-grown man. The refrigerator was too small. The cupboards were full. Her eyes landed on the iron trunk in the corner. It was compact, sturdy, and airtight enough if sealed properly. But Zhang was too tall. He wouldn't fit. Yi Baowen realized that if she wanted to fit him into the box, she would have to make him smaller. It was a thought that would have broken a weaker mind. But Yi simply began to plan. She needed tools. She needed a way to stop the smell. And she needed to act normal, because tomorrow was another day, and she had appearances to keep. The sun rose over Tuen Mun on February 10th, 1999, casting a gray light into the living room of Unit 2936. Inside, the air was already beginning to sour. Yi Baowen had a problem that was rapidly becoming a biological hazard. Zhang Wenwei's body lay on the floor, stiffening in rigor mortis. The plan to hide him in the iron trunk had hit a gruesome snag. The human body is not designed to fold neatly into a metal box. Yi stood at a precipice. She could flee, leaving the carnage for the police to find, or she could finish what she had started. She chose the latter. But to make Zhang fit into the trunk, and to buy herself enough time to figure out a permanent disposal method, she needed to alter the state of the remains. She needed to prevent the smell of decomposition from alerting the neighbors in the densely packed housing estate. Her solution was chillingly domestic. She didn't go to a chemical supplier or a hardware store for industrial acid. She went to the local market. Yi left her daughter in the apartment, possibly sleeping, possibly playing near the corpse of her father, and went shopping. She purchased a massive quantity of coarse rock salt. Salt has been used for millennia to preserve meat, to draw out moisture, and to halt the bacterial processes that cause rot. In Yi's mind, she wasn't just hiding a body, she was preserving a secret. Upon returning to the apartment, she realized her household tools were insufficient for the task of dismemberment. The kitchen knife she had was too small, too dull for bone and cartilage. This is where her manipulation of the men in her life reached its peak. She picked up the phone and called Liu Zhenhua, her artist ex-boyfriend, the man she had kept on the hook as a friend. She asked him to come over. She told him she was moving some things and needed help. Then, with a voice devoid of tremors, she added a specific request. Could he please buy her a new knife on his way? She claimed her chicken chopper had broken. Liu Zhenhua, blinded by his lingering affection and completely unaware of the slaughterhouse waiting for him, agreed. He arrived at the apartment, handed her the new heavy-duty cleaver, and even helped her move some heavy items. He later recalled sharing a meal with her. All the while, the body of her boyfriend was concealed just feet away. Yi played the role of the struggling young mother perfectly, masking the monster she had become. Once Liu Zhenhua left, Yi Baowen went to work. Using the new cleaver, she began the process of dismembering the father of her child. The forensic details suggest a chaotic but determined effort. She severed his hands and his left foot. These parts were small enough to be disposed of immediately. She placed them into plastic rubbish bags. The head and the torso, however, were too large to flush or easily discard without attracting attention. She wrapped Zhang's head in white cloth, perhaps a final subconscious act of reverence, or simply to avoid looking into his dead eyes. She placed the head and the main torso into the iron trunk. Then, she poured the coarse salt over the remains. She packed it in tight, covering every inch of flesh she could reach, creating a dry, saline environment intended to mummify the tissues and suppress the odor. She closed the lid and locked it. For the next few days, Yi Baowen lived with the box. She walked past it to get a glass of water. Her daughter likely played next to it. Yi made several trips to the trash collection point downstairs. Discarding the bags containing the hands and foot, she effectively scattered pieces of Zhang Wenwei across the Tuen Mun refuse system, hoping they would be incinerated or buried in a landfill before anyone noticed. She almost succeeded. If not for the tenacity of Lu Zhicheng, the roommate who realized the locks had been changed and called the brother Yi, might have eventually found a way to dispose of the trunk as well. But the smell, despite the salt, eventually won out. The humid Hong Kong air and the bacterial breakdown were faster than her preservation efforts. When the police finally raided the apartment on Valentine's Day and opened that trunk, they didn't just find a body. They found the aftermath of a desperate, amateur attempt to rewrite reality. A year after her arrest, Yi Baowen stood trial. The courtroom was packed. The Hong Kong press had dubbed it the salted corpse case, and the public was hungry for details. The prosecution painted her as a cold, calculating killer who lured a man to his death and butchered him. They sought a murder conviction, which carried a mandatory life sentence. However, the defense told a different story. They presented the history of abuse, the rape at 14, the forced births, the poverty, the beatings. They argued that Yi was not a murderer acting out of malice, but a victim acting out of survival. They invoked the defense of provocation, suggesting that Zhang's violent attack on that final night had triggered a loss of self-control that any reasonable person in her position might have experienced. The jury was faced with a difficult choice. Was she a monster or a victim? In the end, the jury believed the narrative of the battered woman. They acquitted her of murder. Instead, they found her guilty of the lesser charge of manslaughter, along with the charge of preventing the lawful burial of a body. The judge, taking into account her tragic background and young age, handed down a sentence of 10 years in prison. The verdict sent shockwaves through the city. Many felt that 10 years was a slap on the wrist for such a grotesque crime. The image of the head in the salt-filled trunk was seared into the public consciousness, and there was an outcry that justice had not been served for Zhang Wenwei. But the legal system had spoken. Yi Baowen was sent to a correctional facility, and the door slammed shut on that chapter of her life. But tragedies like this rarely end with a gavel strike. The ripples of violence spread outward. touching everyone in their path. The primary victim of this collateral damage was Yi Yongyu, the daughter born in a bathroom and raised in a house of horrors. With her father dead and her mother in prison, Yi Yongyu was effectively an orphan. No relatives stepped forward to take her in. The taint of the crime was too strong, the burden too heavy. She was placed into the foster care system, bouncing between orphanages and temporary homes. She grew up with the knowledge that her mother had killed her father. She carried the stigma of her name, a name that was infamous in the press. The psychological scars of her early childhood, the neglect, the witnessing of violence, the sudden disappearance of her parents, began to manifest as she entered adolescence. Yi Yongyu followed a path that tragically mirrored her parents. Lacking guidance, love, and stability, she sought belonging in the streets. She fell in with the wrong crowd, looking for the same escape her mother had sought years prior. Fast forward to June 23, 2014. Police officers were conducting a routine patrol in the Mongkok district, an area known for its vibrant night markets and, conversely, its underbelly of vice. In the lobby of the Kingland Apartments on Boundary Street, officers spotted a young girl acting suspiciously. She looked nervous, her eyes darting around the hallway. When the officers approached her, she tried to evade them. They stopped her and searched the plastic bag she was clutching. Inside, they didn't find school books or groceries. They found 75 grams of methamphetamine, commonly known as ice. The street value was estimated at 43,000 Hong Kong dollars, or about 5,500 US dollars. The girl was arrested immediately. As the handcuffs clicked around her wrists, she began to weep. She begged the officers for a chance, pleading with them to let her go. When they ran her identity back at the station, the name triggered a memory in the police database. This was Yi Yongyu, the daughter of the salted corpse killer. She was just 15 years old. The history of violence had come full circle. Yi Yongyu had dropped out of school at 15, just like her mother. She had met bad men, just like her mother. And now, she was sitting in a police interrogation room, facing a prison sentence, just like her mother. During her trial, her defense attorney painted a heartbreaking picture. He argued that society had failed this girl from the moment she was born. She had never had a chance. The court heard how she had been approached by drug dealers who exploited her vulnerability, using her as a mule to transport the narcotics because her youth made her less likely to be stopped. The judge looked at the teenager standing in the dock. Behind her was a ghost, the legacy of the 1999 murder. The court recognized that sending her to an adult prison for a long duration would only complete the destruction of her life. In a rare act of mercy, the court acknowledged the special circumstances of her upbringing. While the quantity of drugs was significant enough to warrant a heavy sentence, the judge opted for a lenient approach focused on rehabilitation rather than purely punitive incarceration. Yi Yongyu was sentenced to a period of detention in a rehabilitation center, designed to break the cycle of addiction and crime, rather than simply locking her away for decades. It was a small glimmer of hope in a story devoid of it. Yi Yongyu wept in court, promising the judge she would never offend again, that she would try to rewrite the script that had been handed to her at birth. This case serves as a grim autopsy of a relationship gone wrong. Yi Baowen was both a victim and a perpetrator. She endured years of abuse that the legal system failed to address, and when she finally snapped, she became the very thing she hated. She destroyed her abuser, but in doing so, she destroyed herself and the future of her child. The tragedy of the salted corpse is not just about the gruesome method of disposal. It is about the systemic failures that allowed a 14-year-old girl to be groomed, raped, and isolated until she felt her only option was a cleaver. It is a reminder that monsters are often made, not born. As for Yi Baowen, upon her release from prison after serving her 10-year sentence, she reportedly refused to reunite with her daughter, perhaps out of shame, or perhaps out of a desire to sever all ties with the past. The mother and daughter, bound by blood and tragedy, became strangers, drifting separately through the crowded streets of Hong Kong, forever shadowed by the Iron Trunk in Tuen Mun. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into one of Hong Kong's most disturbing cases. The story of Yi Baowen challenges our understanding of justice. Was 10 years enough for a life taken? Or was it too harsh for a life already ruined? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Do you think the jury made the right call with the manslaughter verdict? If you found this case compelling, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more investigations into the dark corners of true crime. Stay safe and see you in the next one.